from our witnesses. I'll ask our ranking minority member, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Hamilton, if he wishes to make an opening. But before you do, I'd like to recognize that in our audience today is Dr. Bukashi, the Prime Minister in exile of Kosovo. We welcome you, Dr. Bukashi, along with a delegation from the Albanian American Civic League. You're all most welcome. Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, I'll follow your advice and not give an opening statement. We welcome our witnesses and look forward to their testimony. Thank you.
Does any other member seek recognition? If not, we'll call on Ambassador Gelbard. Ambassador Gelbard was named by the President as Special Representative for the President, the Secretary of State for implementation of the Dayton Peace Accords. And Ambassador Gelbard is responsible for development, coordination, and implementation of our U.S. policy and programs related to Dayton. He will be the administration's negotiator, coordinator, and program director for the Dayton Accords throughout this crucial period. And as we know, Ambassador Gelbard is a career Foreign Service officer assigned as Assistant Secretary for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement before taking on this new role. Ambassador Gelbard, we welcome you, and you may give your full statement as you have printed it, or you may summarize it, whichever you deem appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I returned from the Balkans last night specifically to appear before this committee, and I thank you for this opportunity, to which I have been looking forward a great deal. I would like to submit my entire statement for the record, and I would like to emphasize in my oral statement points on Kosovo and some of the issues on Bosnia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing comes at a particularly opportune time, as we have recently made great progress in implementation of the Dayton Accords. In fact, the last part of 1997 and early 1998 will likely be remembered as the turning point in the international community's efforts, led by the United States, to implement the peace agreement. But before I turn to the specifics in Bosnia, I would like to update you on the situation in Kosovo. Developments over the last few weeks there clearly are of grave concern to the world. We are focusing intensely on immediate diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions and stop the violence. This includes bringing every tool we have to bear to ensure that President Milosevic understands the consequences of his actions. He used brutal force against non-combatants, and the result is that some 80 dead and more missing are in Kosovo. I can assure you that we are not going to stand by and watch 1991 unfold again. I told President Milosevic that the United States is appalled by his government's actions in Kosovo, and that any progress toward normalizing our bilateral relations or lowering the outer wall of sanctions is impossible as long as he refuses to commit himself to resolving the Kosovo issue through a peaceful dialogue and making serious progress on that. During my meetings in Pristina, I extended the administration's condolences to the families of those who died as a result of the recent violence, emphasized the international community's outrage over Belgrade's use of brutal and overwhelming force, and called for restraint. A cycle of violence can only bring more suffering. As part of our efforts to energize negotiations between Belgrade and the Kosovar Albanian community, we will also intensify our dialogue with the Sant'Egidio Catholic community. Belgrade's outrageous and immoral actions demand a tough, united response by the international community. The contact group's March 9th statement made clear that events in Kosovo are not an internal matter, as they have described it, but rather a legitimate subject of international concern. It is Milosevic who has internationalized this issue. We condemn the excessive force used by Serbian police against civilians and peaceful demonstrators, and reiterated that Kosovo's problems can only be resolved through dialogue. Developments in Kosovo clearly will have an impact on regional security and on Bosnia. We, of course, will continue to be focused on this at the highest levels. Vigorous U.S. leadership is and will remain the key component of international efforts to restore stability to the Balkans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, in this 10-day waiting period that we have here, Milosevic hadn't done anything that gives you any encouragement at this point. Is that right?
As of this morning, and to the degree I am aware, I am totally dissatisfied with the lack of progress.
Now, President Bush issued in December of '92 the so-called Christmas warning. And is that still American policy? I think President Clinton reaffirmed it in January of '93. Is that still American policy?
Well, as the President said yesterday, we believe that no option should be ruled in or out for now. What we prefer to do, as I said in response to the Chairman's question a moment ago, is use every possible economic sanction or other kind of tool we have diplomatically, but we're not ruling anything out.
We'll now consider H. Conres 235 relating to the situation in Kosovo. Chair lays the resolution before the committee. Clerk will report the title of the resolution.
Right.
This resolution is in the original jurisdiction of our full committee. Without objection, the clerk will read the preamble and operative language of the subcommittee amendment in the nature of a substitute for amendment. Clerk will read the resolution for amendment.
Whereas the Albanian people of Kosovo constitute more than 90% of the total population of Kosovo. Whereas the political rights of the Albanian people of Kosovo were curtailed when the government of Yugoslavia illegally amended the Constitution of Yugoslavia without the consent of the people of Kosovo on March 23, 1989.
Waive the reading of the resolution, deem it to be in full. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk, which has already been distributed. Clerk will report the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gilman, strike the preamble and insert the following. Whereas the Albanian people...
Without objection, the reading of the amendment in the nature of substitute is dispensed with. Last week, the world witnessed the horrifying spectacle of violence once again sweeping a part of the Balkans. The long-suffering people of the province of Kosovo in Serbia, more than 90% of whom are Albanian, were subjected to brutal assaults by the Serbian paramilitary police forces. Whole villages were attacked, their inhabitants forced to flee into the hills. Entire families were massacred as the Serbian forces indiscriminately fired into their households. When the Kosovars gathered to peacefully protest these atrocities, the Serbian police met them with more brutality, first firing on the marchers with tear gas and water cannons, and then beating anyone who came within reach. We should recall that the conflict in former Yugoslavia began in 1989 in Kosovo, when the dictator Slobodan Milosevic arbitrarily and illegally terminated the autonomous status enjoyed by Kosovo under the constitution of the former Yugoslavia. The international community, and our government in particular, has repeatedly warned Milosevic that he'd be subject to severe consequences should he be responsible for violence in Kosovo. I hope that this resolution will assist the efforts of Ambassador Gelbard and our diplomats to make it clear to Milosevic and the Serbian authorities that we review their actions with abhorrence and disgust, and that we insist on a speedy and peaceful resolution of the problems in Kosovo. We cannot and will not tolerate another Bosnia in the Balkans. Accordingly, I urge my colleagues to send a message to Belgrade and support H. Conres 235. Mr. Lentos.
First of all, I want to associate myself fully with your comments. They were extremely appropriate, and I would like to say a word about the relationship between the tragedy in Bosnia and the possible impending tragedy in Kosovo. Because the West failed to act, over 200,000 innocent people in Bosnia are now dead, 1.25 million are refugees, and the cost to the United States alone thus far has been $8 billion. The cost in destruction vastly above that. Now, if the West will not act now, I predict with certainty that there will be a similar set of horrifying statistics looking us in the face 6 months or a year and a half from now. The people of Kosovo have suffered long and hard. I visited Kosovo on numerous occasions, and I was profoundly impressed by the Kosovar people in their determination to peacefully carve out for themselves a modicum of a decent life. They have been suppressed, persecuted, discriminated against, and in the final analysis in recent days, killed by a police state. I think we have a moral obligation to identify ourselves with the fight of the Kosovo people, and I think it's critical that the United States provide the leadership without which Europe again will do nothing, as it failed to do in Bosnia. We have to lead the way, and if we do, our European friends and allies will follow.
Let me tell you what a great day this is for Kosovo. We just came from this important hearing. We found out about it. Our Albanian American Civic League found out from Congressman Gilman 3 weeks ago that they were going to have Mr. Gelbard here to talk about Bosnia. And even before we heard about Granica, we said, Congressman Gilman, you cannot talk about Bosnia without talking about Kosovo. Yeah! Kosovo! Kosovo! And from today on, no one will mention Kosovo without mentioning Granica. You would have been very proud today to see what happened inside the Committee on International Affairs hearing room, where Mr. Gelbard was asked repeatedly about Kosovo, why we are not tougher than we are on Kosovo. Why do we use words like terrorism when we don't know what those words mean? And Mr. Milosevic has a green light, like he got from Baker when he said Yugoslavia should stay together. Today, Mr. Gelbard got very tough questions from Congressman Gilman, from Congressman Lantos, from Rohrabacher, Congressman Payne, right down the list, and a very, very pleasant surprise, the former chairman of the committee, the ranking Democrat, Lee Hamilton from Indiana, gave very, very tough testimony for the Kosovars. He said we cannot let this happen. Let me tell you more about what happened this morning. I forgot to mention one, and maybe others that will come to my mind. And you know that we had a meeting with Congressman Gilman with about 20 Albanian leaders in New York 2 Saturdays ago about this hearing to make Congressman Gilman's resolution. But today, we were pleasantly surprised when Congressman Smith came in, and before they voted on that tough resolution, he said, Mr. Chairman, I have 4 amendments that I want to give to this resolution, and he made it even tougher so that Milosevic understands that Washington is serious when it comes to the Albanian people of Kosovo. So Chris Smith,
Let me just say something before we introduce the next speaker who has a few words to say. We have to understand the way America works. We have a very difficult story. The Albanian people have been illegally divided politically. We know that. We don't feel divided, not our culture, not our flag, not our blood, but we have been abused by the big nations. We know that. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to accept it. Nor does it mean that we have to go crazy and try to put all the Albanians in one state again. Because that may not happen, and that may not be important, because Europe is changing. The borders will come down in Europe anyway in the next 10, 20 years. But what we need to do is we have got to make the case to the American people and to Congress that we respect ourselves as a nation, that we are one nation of people, whether we are in Macedonia, Montenegro, Prisheva, Albania, Kosovo, and wherever. If we have that feeling and make that case, and Chamria, Northern Greece, for sure, and we just met with someone from there, then we will get the respect that we deserve. And that respect is more than just human rights, it's national respect, so that no matter where we are respected for our culture, we're able to speak our language, we're able to raise our flag, we're treated equally with everybody. That's what this world is all about today, and none of that exists in Kosovo. None of it. And that's the case we made today in front of Congress. And people are starting to wake up to that fact. But we can't do it just one day. We got to do it every day. Ucheka! Ucheka! That is the legitimate government in Serbia, and it should not be allowed to operate on top of the Albanian people. That's the message we gave. The only solution is independence for Kosovo. Autonomy does not work. We tried that. You need independence. A republic status for Kosovo. Free, like all the other republics. Free Kosovo. Free Kosovo. Free Kosovo. Free Kosovo. Free Kosovo. Remember what Ben Gilman did in 1993 when we found out in the Jewish Holocaust Museum that tells that terrible story about what Hitler did to the Jews in World War II. When we found out that Albanians were not listed on the list, we went to Congressman Gilman and we said, do you know the story about the Albanian people? That any Jew in Albania and any Jew who made it to Albania was saved. 100%. He brought that story. He brought that story. He brought that story to the Holocaust Museum, to the Congress. And that is, my friends, as important as the resolution he passed today, because we need other people to understand who we are, who the Albanian people are. And Ben Gilman does his job, not only in Congress, but also out there in the community. Sunday, he gave a speech in front of all the Jewish leaders in New York, and he waved the book
with the Jewish flag on it and the Albanian flag to say how good the Albanian people are. Gilman! Gilman!
Thank you, DioGuardi, and welcome all of you. I want to commend all of you for coming to Washington on this very important occasion as our committee took up the Albanian Kosovo measure. And it was a good measure, and we adopted it today. The savagery that Serbia has unleashed on its Albanian population in Kosovo in the past few days goes far beyond anything that we've seen in the years of Serbian oppression in Kosovo. The Congress is appalled at what we see is happening in Kosovo. We hold the brutal dictatorship of Serbian leader Milosevic directly responsible for those terrible events. And I like that sign back there, send Milosevic to The Hague. It's outrageous that Serbia dismisses the protests of the international community as an interference in internal affairs. Have we heard that before? We sure did in the Soviet Union. That's not what we're here for. We're here to remind Serbia, like other countries in Europe, that they're bound by the international standards of human rights contained in the Helsinki Final Act. They're a signatory. Let's hold them to it. Last week we introduced our measure, H. Conres 235. That measure calls for an end to violent oppression of the legitimate rights of all the people of Kosovo. We've just adopted that resolution this morning in our committee. It'll be brought up on the floor next week, and we'll welcome your support. Tell your representatives to support this measure when it comes on the House floor next week. That resolution calls on our government not to lift any sanctions now in effect against Serbia and to reimpose the sweeping economic embargo that the UN placed on Serbia during the war in Bosnia. It also calls upon Belgrade not to impede the elections that are scheduled for this spring in Kosovo and have now been postponed, and to immediately implement the education agreement that Milosevic made with President Rugova in September of last year. Today, Ambassador Robert Gelbar testified before our committee. He just returned from a trip to Albania, got in last night, where he discussed the situation with Kosovo with our allies. We questioned him about our options for dealing with the Serbian violence, and we made an appeal to him not to classify the armed group, the opposition group, as terrorists. They're not terrorists, they're defenders. Your being here today underscores how important this issue is. And you're reminding us all of the human rights violations in Kosovo. You're reminding the Congress how important this is. And hopefully the President will get the message that it's time that he speaks out on this very important issue. Kosovo, Roof! I'm going to present Congressman Gilman to give to his staff what we got off the internet, the massacre in Drenica, the pictures, how terrible they are, of the children, of the bodies, and even the pregnant women that were just brutally murdered in their rooms, not resisting. And I want you to have this, President Gilman. Also, you have to see this book, because you probably haven't seen it, but we made this book a reality. You look at the Albanian flag and the Jewish flag. Congressman Gilman. Congressman Gilman. Congressman Gilman. 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 story that no other nation in Europe can say. They saved 100% of the Jews. Only the Albanian people can say that, and Congressman Gillen knows it. And he sent this book to every member of Congress to tell that good story. So we've got a great friend in Congressman Gilman. If you want a copy of this book, you write me, the Civic League, and I will send it to you. We have these books in New York. Congressman Gilman, thank you so much. Many of you have heard about Shirley Cloyes. Shirley Cloyes has done a lot for the Albanian people. She's a publisher, she's a writer, she's a human rights activist.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ill, so I'm not in my usual speaking form. But I want to say this is an extremely important day. When the Albanian American Civic League found out 3 weeks ago that the Gelbard hearing was going to happen in Washington on Bosnia, we moved immediately to get that hearing to focus on Kosovo. This is well before anything happened in Granica, because we knew what was going on. And we insist not only that another Bosnia doesn't happen in Kosovo, I insist that another Bosnia has been happening in Kosovo for 10 years, and it is absolutely intolerable. It has to be stopped. I insist on free Kosovo, 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 free Kosovo. Let me interrupt, because it's very, very important for you to do two things, in my opinion. Do not allow Ujaka to be called terrorists and to be criminalized. What I said to Mr. Gelbard. What I said to Mr. Gelbard today, and he was very, very, very upset with me. I said, if Vučić is terrorist, then we're all terrorists. And he accused me of using inflammatory language. But I submit that he was the one who used reckless language when he declared the KLA a terrorist organization. It has not been declared under U.S. law a terrorist organization. And I further submit there are 400,000 Albanian Americans, Albanians in America. We are all KLA, Mr. Gelbard. Another thing that you need to know, tell your congressmen and senators right immediately, praising the Gilman resolution, but also tell them Mr. Gilman went as far as he could today, but we must go much further. It doesn't mean anything to put a military arms embargo against Belgrade. It's got one of the major military powers in the region. We have to demand two other things. We have to demand a no-fly zone. They did it in Bosnia 2 years too late. We need no-fly. Secondly, we must demand that in the late 20th century, occupation is illegal. The occupation of Kosovo by the Serbs is illegal, and the troops must be taken out and replaced by UN peacekeepers, and the Red Cross has to be allowed in. And lastly, the code word, do not allow anyone to tell you that the danger is about a greater Albania. You'll hear that everywhere. Tell them, oh, no, 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 no. The only drive for hegemony is the drive for greater Serbia that we've seen in the the region since, the end of the 80s, from Croatia to Slovenia to Bosnia. We will not accept it. We will not allow the Balkan crisis to be settled on the backs of the Albanian people. We will not allow Mr. Milosevic's vision of an ethnically cleansed Slavic state to take place. Thank you very much.